Hello everyone! In this session of the RISE online presentation series, I will present persistent inequalities in early learning opportunities, focusing on a large-scale expansion of pre-primary education in Ethiopia. This research is prepared by the RIR Center at the University of Cambridge and RISE Ethiopian team from the Addis Ababa University. Here is a brief outline of the presentation. In Part 1, we look at the background in early childhood education and the Ethiopian context of the reform. There is global attention to early childhood education. First, the recent UN Sustainable Development Goals offer a great opportunity to move towards universal preschool and amplify global support to ECE. The importance of ECE has been well established. Quality ECE sets a strong foundation for lifelong learning trajectories. Universal ECE also makes education systems more effective and efficient. Growing evidence shows that preschool attendees are less likely to drop out or repeat grades and more likely to complete primary and secondary school. Equitable ECE is seen as an effective strategy for promoting economic growth. ECE narrows early achievement gaps, and it also provides caregivers with the opportunity to work. However, building ECE systems to deliver quality preschool at scale is still challenging. Many low and middle-income countries introduce a bold approach to expand ECE, but we know little about the degree of inequality and effectiveness of the large-scale expansion in a resource-constrained system. Ethiopia has made remarkable progress towards universal primary education since 2000. However, for more than 2 decades, pre-primary serves less than 5% of children from wealthy backgrounds. ECE in Ethiopia provided on a small scale by private, non-governmental, and faith-based organizations. Since 2007, with global pressure from Education for All and strong leadership from Minister of Education, National Task Force was formed for ECE. And in 2010, governments of Ethiopia finally adopted the National Policy Framework for Early Childhood Care and Education. This policy framework represents the government's first commitment to ECE and served as a critical juncture for large-scale expansion. It established a clear role for Ministry of Education in leading and coordinating ECE with Ministry of Health and Ministry of Women and Children Affairs. It has a specific focus on school readiness and preschool education within the education sector. This figure shows a rapid expansion of enrollments in pre-primary since 2008. The yellow bar is O class or zero class, 1-year reception class for 6-year-olds provided in the public primary school. The blue bar is kindergarten, 3-year programs mostly run by the private and NGO sectors. The green bar is child-to-child approach, an informal programs between young children with their older siblings. In the first year of introduction, O class provided 1 million children with an immediate access to ECE and currently serving more than 2.6 million children in Ethiopia. From 2010 to 16, the gross enrollment ratio in pre-primary increased from 5 to 50%. The provision of O class is attractive, which requires limited infrastructure investments and also easily accommodate within existing structures. Pre-primary expansion in Ethiopia is government-led reform. Government aims to use ECE as a tool to increase equity in the education system. It targets children who are exposed to high risk of exclusion. However, during this massive expansion, there is no significant financial commitment from central governments and many O classes established by community contributions. There are a number of key challenges, including equitable access to preschool, quality constraints, and incoherence between national goal and local capacities. The question remains whether the large-scale reform in preschool contributes to wider and equitable access to preschool. Our research starts with the following question. Has the large-scale expansion of pre-primary education reduced or reinforced inequalities in access to preschool? We first look at to what extent children from different backgrounds participate in preschool after a large-scale expansion of pre-primary education. Second, we also look at the determinants of preschool attendance and students' early grade reading achievement before and after the reform. For the first research question, we used school census data from Ethiopia's National Education Statistics, which collects data from more than 30,000 primary schools in Ethiopia annually. For the second one, we leveraged two sets of early grade reading assessment data, which administered in 2010 pre-reform period and in 2016 during the post-reform period. Part 2 look at the trends in preschool participation. In order to look at the regional disparities in preschool access, we grouped 11 regions into 3 groups based on the poverty and school resources. The first group is regions with mostly urban areas, including Addis Ababa. They show the lowest poverty index close to 0 or up to 0.3. The second group includes the 4 largest regions in Ethiopia with a mix of urban and rural populations. Their poverty index is higher than the first group at 0.5. Lastly, the third group includes historically disadvantaged regions in Ethiopia. There are a large proportion of rural population, including pastoralists and refugee communities. Poverty index is the highest, up to 0.7. The figure shows the large regional variation in preschool access in 2010, 11, and 16 during the reform period. The first 3 regions with mostly urban area reached 80 to 90% of GR in 6 years. Diudawa reached less than 50%, but this city administration has a large proportion of private preschool, which may not be captured by official statistics. The next 4 regions in the second group, GR varies from 40% to 100% in 2016. You can see the most rapid growth in preschool access in these regions. In the last 4 disadvantaged regions, there is little growth in preschool access. In Afar and Somali, still less than 10% of children has access to preschool, and other 2 regions show slightly better access. Regions were unequally prepared to respond to the new policy goals. Disadvantaged regions still suffer from a lack of resources and capacities to expand preschool. Although not presented here, another dimension relates to gender. A persistent gap was observed in favor of boys, but less severe than regional variation. Gender parity index remains at 0.9 during the reform period. This figure complements the previous slides. It shows a proportion of primary schools with O class from 8 regions in the second and third group. Surprisingly, in 4 regions, more than 80% of primary school now has O class. By contrast, in 4 disadvantaged regions, only less than half of primary school has O class. This figure shows the distribution of children enrolled in O class by 3 groups, underage, age 6, and overage. OCLAS clearly targets age 6 the year before they officially enter primary school. However, only 42% of children enrolled in OCLAS are 6-year-olds, and more than half of children are 4 years or 5 years old. Underage enrollments becomes a big obstacle to EC systems. It could worsen the supply-side constraints for the targeted age group and weaken service quality due to multi-aged classroom. Last part, we'll look at the determinants of preschool participation and early grade achievement. As mentioned earlier, we return to recent EGRA data to determine whether preschool access is similarly driven by students' characteristics before and after the reform. We leveraged two regionally representative data of the EGRA in 2010 and 2016. This corresponds to the period of 6 years spanning the reform when GR increased nearly 10 times. Each EGRA dataset has 8,000 to 9,000 children from more than 200 schools in Ethiopia. The test items for 2 rounds have been equated to ensure the comparability across the 2 rounds. The bar in the figure shows the school-level average of students who ever attended preschool. In particular, this captures well the enormous trends over the reform, how the education system shifts from the elite to master system over the past 6 years. Average enrollments tripled from 14 to 38%, while enrollments doubled in urban and tripled in rural area. This table presents results from logic models that examine the determinants of preschool attendance. Although it suggests little gender bias in preschool participation at an early age, family characteristics continues to be a powerful predictor of preschool participation, even in the context of massive expansion. Fathers and mothers' literacy and home learning environments were strongly associated with a higher chance to attend preschool, and these chances were nearly doubled between 2010 and 2016. As expected, urban and rural residency was a strong predictor for preschool attendance. In both 2010 and 2016, children living in rural areas were 9 percentage points less likely to attend the preschool than those living in urban areas. This implies that universal access will not be achieved unless barriers to preschool uptake for most vulnerable children are identified and addressed from both supply and demand sides. Lastly, we explore the determinants of students' academic achievement measured by oral reading fluency in EGRA. We found a strong association between preschool and early grade reading achievement for the post-reform period, but not for the pre-reform period after taking account of other factors. This may sound counterintuitive, given that there was a sudden influx into the system of many previously excluded children. One plausible explanation could be the potential improvement in the education level of parents and their socioeconomic status, which was coincided with the massive expansion of preschool. For example, Ethiopia's economy experienced strong growth, averaging 10% a year during this period, compared to a regional average of 5%. The composition of those who attended preschool in the EGRA sample increasingly more advantaged between 2010 and 2016, then we could speculate that the beneficiaries of economic growth in Ethiopia are likely to be the beneficiary of preschool reform. Then what is the implications for policy and research? Our findings shows that expansion alone has limited ability to reduce disparities in education opportunities, especially for the most vulnerable children. A diagnostic study of EC system in Ethiopia which was conducted in 2017, also reveals that top-down planning and weak information flow among stakeholders at the different levels may lead to regional disparities in preschool access and its growth. Regional disparities further link to the variation in community awareness, motivation, and resources for early learning. As explained earlier, the beneficiaries of economic growth are likely to be the beneficiaries of preschool reform. It implies that those who remained with the most disadvantaged backgrounds were more likely to have been left behind from the preschool expansion, which is not aligned with the government's ambitions to the proper expansion of preschool. Based on the findings of the research, policy attention should be given to provide pre-primary education to more than half of preschool-aged children who still do not have access to any form of preschool. Otherwise, the disadvantage will be accumulated, and the gap between preschool attendees and non-attendees will be widened. Although the government started increasing the financial resources for pre-primary, the achievement of universal pre-primary is nearly impossible with the current commitment. There are only 3% of government's education budget allocated to pre-primary sector in 2015. There are urgent needs for EC-dedicated funding from governments and donors, and there should be a targeted approach for the poorest and marginalized communities. Policymakers also need to introduce measures to promote age-appropriate enrollments for better quality preschool and the efficiency of the education system. Lastly, building awareness and providing sustainable financial and human resources is critical to building coherent EC systems. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Please send your questions to the following email address. Thank you very much.